Hello everyone, welcome to Astronautics for Exploit. I am Dr. Ayenshola Ogundele and I will be presenting Suborbital Spaceflight. The overview of my presentation is as follows. Space travel in the new millennium. Suborbital space travel. Benefits and uses of suborbital spaceflight. Potential research areas and suborbital versus orbital spaceflight. Suborbital flight activities, including the use of sounding rockets, aircraft, high-altitude balloons, and suborbital reusable launch vehicles, offer valuable opportunities to advance science, train the next generation of scientists and engineers, and provide opportunities for participants in the programs to acquire skills in systems engineering and system integration that are critical to maintaining the nation's leadership in space programs. On January 1, 2001, the new millennium begins at 0 hour Greenwich Mean Time GMT. According to the rules adopted at an international conference held in October 1884, GMT is also referred to as Coordinated University Time, UTC. This picture shows suborbital and orbital launch trajectories. Space flight happenings in the new millennium. Formerly, only professional astronauts were able to sojourn to the space to dock with International Space Station, stay in the station, and perform scientific experiments and spacewalk. Presently, in this new millennium, civilians are beginning to have opportunity to sojourn to the space through commercial spaceflight activities and experience weightlessness due to the opening up for civilian activities. But this is at a considerable cost. This picture shows Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2 rocket plane, Blue Origin's New Shepard spaceship, and Marston Space Systems lander vehicle. Suborbital space travel. A suborbital space flight is a space flight in which the spacecraft reaches outer space, but its trajectory intersects the atmosphere or surface of the gravitating body from which it was launched. It cannot complete one orbital revolution or reach escape velocity, and cannot be classified as having the capability of an artificial satellite. Space flights which attain sufficient velocity to go into low Earth orbit and then deorbited before completing their first full orbit are not considered to be suborbital. Initial suborbital spaceflight. Initial research and development work on suborbital flights were undertaken so as to test spacecraft and launch vehicles that were intended for orbital spaceflight. This picture shows the comparison of different launch vehicles. Vehicles specially designed for suborbital flight. Manned vehicles S-15 and Spaceship One. Unmanned vehicles ICBMs, BMS, and sounding rockets. This picture shows White Knight 2, flying spaceplane carrier. X-15 is a hypersonic rocket-powered aircraft and was operated by the U.S. Air Force and the NASA as part of the X-plane series of experimental aircraft. It set speed and altitude records in the 1960s. Spaceship One was an experimental air-launched rocket-powered aircraft with suborbital spaceflight capability at speeds of up to 3,000 feet per second. It completed the first crew private spaceflight in 2004. Spaceship One won US $10 million Ansari S prize. Its mothership was named White Knight. Both craft were developed and flown by Mujave Aerospace Ventures. This picture shows Spaceship One. Intercontinental Ballistic Missile is a missile with a minimum range of 5,500 kilometers, primarily designed for nuclear weapons delivery. Conventional chemical and biological weapons can also be delivered with varying effectiveness. Sounding rocket is an instrument-carrying rocket designed to take measurements and perform scientific experiments during its suborbital flight, and is a research rocket. It is used to carry instruments from 48 to 145 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. The altitude generally between weather balloons and satellites. Suborbital flights. Initially, suborbital tourist flights focus on attaining the altitude required to qualify as reaching space. The altitude is referred to as Kármán line, 62 miles or 100 kilometers. The suborbital flight path could either be vertical or very steep. Probably, the spacecraft will shut off its engines before reaching maximum altitude, and then coast up to its highest point. This picture shows suborbital flight trajectory. Altitude requirements. An altitude higher than 100 kilometers, that is 62 miles, above sea level is expected to be reached by a suborbital spaceflight before falling back to the Earth. The 100 kilometer, that is 62 miles altitude benchmark, is referred to as the Kármán line. This altitude normally provides microgravity for 3 to 4 minutes of weightless flight. Fédération Aéronautique Internationale chose the Kármán line altitude as reference point. This is the point where a vehicle flying fast enough to support itself with aerodynamic lift from the Earth's atmosphere will be flying faster than orbital speed, thereby making it a suborbital flight. During a few minutes, from the point when the engines are shut off to the point where the atmosphere begins to slow down, the downward acceleration, the passengers will experience weightlessness. Finally, the spacecraft will land back at its takeoff site. This picture shows astronauts on the International Space Station experiencing only microgravity and thus display an example of weightlessness. Flight duration. Suborbital flights can last from seconds to days, 10 minutes to a few hours. Virgin Galactic flight of July 11, 2021, using VSS Unity, took about 90 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes of weightlessness. The spaceplane's portion took only about 15 minutes. The Virgin Galactic spaceplane is shown in this figure. Pioneer 1. Pioneer 1 was NASA's first space probe, which was launched by a terrible rocket on 11 October 1958. The intended function of the probe was to orbit the moon and make scientific measurements. Due to a guidance error, the probe failed to achieve lunar orbit and instead followed a suborbital trajectory. The probe was destroyed upon re-entering Earth's atmosphere. The flight lasted for about 43 hours and reached an apogee of 113,800 kilometers. The Pioneer 1 picture is shown here. Benefits of suborbital spaceflight. Suborbital spaceflights have the following benefits: lower cost, reusability of orbital rockets, quick access to payload and experiment data, less complex suborbital rockets, secure and safe payload, and less bureaucracy. Number 1, lower cost. In comparison, the cost of suborbital rocket is lower than that of its orbital vehicle counterpart. It is cheaper to perform experiments in the microgravity environment for minutes during suborbital spaceflight than in the space station, which uses orbital spaceflight strategy. The current cost estimate is about $250,000 per seat on Virgin Galactic. This picture shows Spaceship Two. Reusability of suborbital rockets. Suborbital rockets have high percentage of being reusable, thereby increases the turnaround time and return on investment. Also, flexibility in launch sites. Blue Origin's reusable New Shepard rocket launches with a space capsule on top is shown in this picture. Another benefit is quick access to payload and experiment data. Due to short recovery time of suborbital rockets, one can easily and quickly access payload and experiment data. There is a possibility of live streaming the data when the payload is still in space. Suborbital spaceflight allows for human-tended experiments, just like the case of traditional zero-G aircraft, with rapid access to the payloads before, during, and after launch. There is increased flight access for design innovation and experimental manipulation due to high projected flight rates. Another benefit of suborbital spaceflight is less complex suborbital rockets. Suborbital rockets are less complicated in comparison to the orbital vehicles. Suborbital spaceflight launch facilities are much simpler to design and use than those of orbital spaceflight. This picture shows S-Core spacecraft. Another benefit is secure, safe, and rapid access to payload. Due to short flight period, the payload is much more secure than silver. The payload can also be easily and rapidly accessed. This picture shows Virgin Galactic spaceplane. Less bureaucracy is another benefit. There's high potential for less bureaucracy than usually being experienced with government space access. This picture shows DARPA's experimental spaceplane. Suborbital spaceflight have various uses, such as space tourism, scientific experiments, suborbital transportation, national security, imaging for commercial purposes, filming and television broadcasting, and package delivery. In this picture, we have Virgin Galactic VSS Unity Spaceliner view of Earth during the vehicle's first trip to space on December 13, 2018. Potential research areas. Research areas that can use suborbital spaceflight are as follows: engineering, for satellite development and validation, deployable payloads release, and advancement of equipment technology readiness levels. Another area is earth science, for satellite development and validation, land use change, climate change, and atmospheric chemistry. And another research area is material science, for processing of materials, novel compounds production, and combustion. Life sciences found application on fertilization and early development, gene expression, physiological response to microgravity, cell-cell interactions. And also, in the area of physics, we have aurora studies, spectral line synthesis, and fluid dynamics. Suborbital versus orbital spaceflight. Suborbital spaceflight is a quick trip to space where suborbital vehicle goes up and down to Earth. It does not send suborbital rocket vehicle into orbit. Suborbital launcher will fly into space but does not have the capability to enter into orbit. The maximum flight speed of a suborbital vehicle will be below orbital velocity. Suborbital rocket is usually smaller in size, less expensive to design, lower cost to operate, safer, and can easily be made reusable. This picture shows Spaceship 2 and Wet Night 2. Orbital spaceflight. Unlike a suborbital spaceflight, an orbital spaceflight is not a quick trip to space. Orbital vehicle goes around Earth's orbit to complete one or more orbits based on the functions and purposes that the vehicle was designed. An orbital spaceflight launches a vehicle at a high enough speed to send it into space for at least one full orbit or more. This picture shows approach of SpaceX Dragon cargo craft to the ISS. For more information, contact Astronautics for Exploit. Thank you.